Hello, I'm Ellen Robertson Green, here with three of the state's most knowledgeable people when it comes to water acquisition and water conservation. To my left is Dr. Michael Weber. He's Deputy Director of the Energy Institute, a mechanical engineer who heads a team of researchers at UT Austin, and your focus is on the relationship between energy and water. And we have Laura Huffman, who is State Director of the Nature Conservancy in Texas. You work with a team of scientists and conservation experts whose job it is to protect the state's natural resources. And finally, Dr. Robert Mace, Texas Water Development Board. You have spent more than 20 years studying water issues in Texas, and you promote conservation and innovative ways to bring water to Texans. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
We'll start with Dr. Mace, Robert. Our water problems certainly didn't begin in 2011 with the drought, and they won't end when and if it ever begins to rain again. True?
True. Texas is a droughty state, and it's been that way from the get-go. We've struggled not only with drought, but with increasing population. And anybody that lives here knows, we're growing at an amazing clip. We've suffered some serious droughts. The most severe was the 1950s, where it was a 6 to 7 year drought, depending where you're at. And this recent drought that we've been in statewide since 2011 is, according to the state climatologist, the second worst drought we've seen on record.
It certainly has been a wake-up call. Laura, I know that you spend a lot of time talking about how we should be using less rather than finding more water.
That's exactly right. The dynamics that Dr. Mace just set up tell us that we're going to have to think about water differently. And the truth is, water is a very fixed asset. We don't have any more or less water today than we ever have. And with Texas doubling in size, most of that population growth, by the way, is going to be concentrating in cities. We're just going to have to think about water differently and use a lot less of it, both for our growing cities, for our energy and industry, for agriculture. And we're going to have to make sure that we leave water in our rivers and streams and aquifers so that it's available for future generations.
And Michael, because you study energy and water, I think that you've talked about how we have alternative forms of energy, but not so with water.
Yeah, this is the trick with water, and really playing off Laura's comments that conservation is one of the strategies that we need to prioritize. With energy, we have other options. They may not be as good, but they exist. With water, we don't have an alternative. It's the only form we can use for life. And we might be able to improve other forms, like take salt water to fresh water, but we need fresh water in the end. And if that feels like a limited resource, it's going to be difficult to manage our way forward unless we change some of our approaches.
Laura, you congratulated the 2013 legislative session for the action they took. Why? What was that?
Well, in 2013, the legislature recognized that not only are we going to have to plan for our water future, we're going to have to fund it also. And so the state does have a 50-year water plan. It describes the strategies that we'll use as a state to make sure that we have water available to all of us. What we like about that plan is that over 20% of it is supposed to be coming from conservation. And when the legislature approved the ballot item for November, what they prioritized was that at least 20% of the funding would go to conservation. So not only in the planning phases, but in the funding phases, we are recognizing that conservation is our cheapest, most efficient way forward.
Robert, that vote in May was for Proposition 6 was approved by voters. More than 73% of the voters approved that.
Correct.
What do you think that says about our current conversation with water in this state?
I think that says that the people of Texas recognize the importance of water, and as you noted, this recent drought has been a wake-up call for a lot of people. So I would say that that vote indicated a strong message from Texans that we need to solve our water problem.
Michael, it is true, though, that 60% of the water used in Texas, maybe more, is used on agriculture, and then there's a lot of water used in creating energy. Do you think there's some disconnect between our economic growth and our need to conserve water? Yeah, how do we reconcile that?
We have water going to a lot of purposes, and agriculture is an obvious one. We use water to grow our crops and grow our food, to feed the people. They're moving in every day, so we have to find food for these people. And then it's also for the cities, as Laura mentioned. It's also for industry and for energy. And so when we think about water constraints, it's not just going to hurt agriculture, which is a very obvious sort of victim of drought. It's also going to hurt industry. It's going to hurt the cities. It's going to hurt our energy production. Energy production is a very valuable, at least economically valuable, part of the Texas sectors. So if we have water issues, we can't think of it just an agricultural problem or just a drinking water problem. It is a statewide problem at every level. And if we start to put a price on it, which is a pretty controversial thing to talk about, What price should cities pay? What price should agriculture pay? What price should industry pay? It gets pretty controversial, but if we had prices that were higher, right now water is pretty cheap actually considered its value to society, it might change how we allocate and what we use it for.
So you think that we should be spending a lot more or paying a lot more for water?
I'm one of those guys who believes that water is very valuable and that our price for it should respect and reflect that value. And there are a lot of places for legacy reasons where the water is falsely cheap. We have some cities in Texas paying a tenth what other cities pay, which means probably one of those cities got it right. And my guess is the more expensive city got it right. And the cities where it's too cheap probably need to adjust the prices to reflect the actual cost of the infrastructure, cleaning and treating it.
Mm-hmm. Laura, I asked your people what a good example was. Where can we look in Texas for people who are doing it right? And they said Australia.
Well, you've got water markets in Australia, and so to Michael's point about pricing, you can use water markets to purchase water to make sure that you've got environmental flows, to make sure that you've got water in growing cities. We've actually got some really nice examples right here in Texas. We've got some nice examples of cities, El Paso and San Antonio come to mind, where they have reduced their per capita consumption of water. We have some really nice examples, Austin is one of them, where cities have invested in water quality protection in order to keep the treatment costs down. San Antonio has done the same thing. So we've got some really nice conservation activities, both on the water quality side and on the water quantity side right here in Texas. And just to provide a little bit of a contrast with what Michael said earlier about price, I think the one thing we want to be careful about when we talk about pricing water appropriately, and generally people mean make it more expensive so that people can serve it. I think one thing we want to pay attention to is the concept of affordability. And in our growing Texas cities, making sure that we grow with grace and remain affordable is a really important thing for us to keep our eye on. So just raising water rates in the name of conservation, I think, is misguided. I think we can change behavior by making people care about the resource more.
This is a real issue with water markets. Water markets will solve a lot of these issues. The risk is it will price people out of the market for water, in which case it's a life or death situation.
Yeah, you cannot not afford water.
Right, there's a human right to water, which should be free or cheap or something, above which maybe markets are pretty efficient.
And I think water costs what water costs, but the future water supplies are going to cost a lot more. In 50 years, we're going to need new water that's equivalent to the water that Austin uses times 64. So we need enough water for 64 Austins in the next 50 years. And a lot of the inexpensive, easy water is gone, whether it's reservoirs or groundwater. Barring water conservation, which is a very affordable way of, an inexpensive way of getting new water. We're looking at desalination, we're looking at pipelines, and it's going to cost a lot of money.
Most of the available nearby water supplies are exhausted for our big cities. And so another thing that we're seeing is traditionally water's been a very local issue. Well, it is now both a local and a state issue because we're going to be sending water around the state to meet growing demands.
The way I think about it is that there's actually no shortage of water. There's plenty of water. It's just in the wrong form, the wrong place, and available at the wrong time of year. So we spend energy and money to get it to the right form, right place, and right time of year.
Robert, earlier you brought up the 1950 drought, a 7-year drought, and that spurred Texans to have a state water plan, to invest in infrastructure, to build dams and reservoirs. There hasn't been a reservoir built in Texas, to my knowledge, in 20 years, and it takes 20 to 30 years, doesn't it, to build a dam, build a reservoir. I'm wondering, two questions. Our stick-to-itiveness after this drought, because after the 50s, it began to rain in the 60s, and we kind of went along our merry way. And so, how serious are we as a state going to take this drought in our state water plan forward? And are reservoirs still a good idea, especially along the I-35 corridor where the growth is so huge?
I think that, we have a water plan, and the good news is there's projects in there that would provide enough water for our cities, our industry, and power for the next 50 years. But you make an excellent point is, we're going to find out if Texans are going to put that plan into effect and make sure we have enough water. Now, it is a plan. Things will change over time. As you mentioned, it is a lot more difficult to build reservoirs these days. There's environmental considerations, both at a state and a federal level. Some very serious private property rights issues that come up, urban, rural issues that was already mentioned, where the local water supplies for a major metropolitan area are exhausted, and they're going to have to reach out and get it from somewhere else. So we'll see where the future water comes from, and then we'll see the local authorities that are responsible for making sure the projects get built or the water conservation gets done, we'll see how they do.
In many ways, for a long time, our water policy was to build a reservoir, then pray for rain. And that's actually worked, although we quit building the reservoirs, we're just praying for rain. And now with the latest plan, maybe we'll do some other things in addition to prayer. We'll see how that sticks.
You know, we talked earlier in the program to the mayor of Wichita Falls, and as we know, they are just about out of water. They're started going toilet to tap, or they say reuse. And that didn't come easily either. It took 2.5 years from the idea to do it until it's just now flowing. And I've heard you say, Robert, that it reflects negatively on all of the state if one community suffers. The people outside the state here, Texas is out of water.
Yes, and it's one thing I learned in 2011 is that even a tiny community with a few dozen water connections will make national and international news about Texas running out of water, and it does. It reflects poorly on the whole state. And so, we work at the state with our sister agencies to make sure people don't run out of water, that the public water systems don't run out of water. And so far through this drought, we haven't had folks run out of water. We've had some folks get pretty close where we've had to haul water, or water's had to been hauled, but nobody has run out of water yet.
When cities are thinking about their future and water supplies, you need to be thinking on a 30 to 50-year time horizon. And you need to be flexible enough so that if technology can give you a different answer in the 20th year of that plan, that you make that shift. And so we'll see, and a good example of that is brackish water. It's slightly salty water that's found in a lot of aquifers all over Texas. We've not done very much planning about how to use those water supplies, but cities that have faced scarcity issues have already been thinking about that. El Paso has had a brackish desal plant for years. San Antonio is looking at one of those. And so cities are going to have to be thinking a long time in advance about their water supplies. And one reason is because those supplies are likely to come from other parts of the state. And the negotiation that's going to happen in the different parts of the state to move water around is not insignificant.
Go ahead.
I would say this is always part of the trick. You either have to move the water to the people or the people to the water. And we get used to living in certain places, so we'd rather move the water to the people. And that's certainly the Southern California model. There's not much water in Southern California, but there's a lot of water in Northern California. And so they spend a lot of energy and a lot of money and a lot of effort to move that water from Sierra, snowpack, melt down to Southern California. And that's enabled a lot of industrial and municipal growth in Southern California. It's been very good economically. It has also been a political flashpoint for the state for years. And every other year, it seems like they have a resolution to consider splitting the state into two. The state, part of the state that has water and the part of the state that doesn't. So moving water around is a solution. It can be very effective, very robust. It can also be very politically touchy.
Well, and it can be environmentally touchy too, I should say.
Yeah.
Once water leaves a basin, chances of it coming back are low. And so how we evaluate what happens to the rivers or the streams or the aquifers that water is leaving is really, really important, because if we exhaust these resources, they're not coming back. And so we've got to be very careful about that.
It sort of raises the question, does the river have a right to the water? And Texas is actually one of the thought leaders in the nation on this, that Texas believes certain rivers have a right to the water, that nature has a right to it. And once you think of nature having a right to the water, not just the people or industry, that flips your priority order and changes what kind of allocations you might do.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I want to cover a little bit of the future. Just quickly, Robert, can you tell us, there are two weather patterns over, I think, the Atlantic Pacific that you think might bode not well for our weather?
Well, you've heard of El Nino, La Nina cycles, which are sea surface temperatures that impact climate and weather, or in Texas. There's two others. Actually there's many others, but there's two others: the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation and the Pacific decadal oscillation. Also sea surface temperature variations that impact our climate that are on a decadal basis. The last time both of those oscillations were in a bad place for Texas, we saw the Dust Bowl and we saw the drought of the 50s. Then we had a pretty good spell where we were cooler than normal, wetter than normal, from the mid-60s up to the mid-90s. And then both those oscillations flipped bad for Texas about 96. And so we've been in that cycle since the mid-90s. The good news is that is a cycle that hopefully we'll come out of and will be cooler and wetter than normal. Bad news is we might have another 5 to 15 years of a greater propensity for droughts. We talked about the drought starting in 2011 statewide, but West Texas, the drought started in 99-2000 is when reservoir levels started going down.
And quickly, just about 30 seconds, Laura, I'll let you have the last word. What would your advice be, or what would you hope that the 84th session will do?
I think we need to continue the discussion about water. We need to tighten up this discussion about the water energy nexus. It's interesting to me that we've got a 50-year water plan that sort of slates out where we're going to get water, but we don't have a corresponding game plan for energy, and energy needs water most of the time. And so I think this session is all about how we're going to sustain both our economies and our growing cities, and do that while looking out for our natural resources. We are a function of our natural resources here in Texas, and to stay successful, we need to keep an eye out on them.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.